Right, hello everybody. My name is Silas Smith. This is my project for Population Geography 4345, and my professor is Dr. McDaniels. So in today's little video here, I'm going to talk about my research paper that I've been writing, and here's my presentation on it. So the presentation I decided to call The Civil War and its Impacts on the Environment, Geography, and Population. So a lot of my research for this project was trying to see if how the Civil War and the battles that were fought during the Civil War and afterwards during the Civil War, and how the soldiers stayed near these battlegrounds in the Civil War, how they affected the environment, geography, and the population of the South. And more specifically than that, I want to see if I was really interested to see if you can still see these effects to this day. So let's get into it. So if you've ever been to a Civil War battlefield, you may be able to spot certain things from time to time that are still present. So, like, an example, I like to go to a lot of Civil War battlegrounds. For instance, Kennesaw Mountain near here. You can still find, like, sometimes, very rarely, like, bullet casings from that time and things like that, like burn marks on trees, on the ground from when there was fires during that time. And there are still things that are preserved from those timelines, like such as cannonballs and things like that. So, with this research, I really was interested to see if the Civil War contributed to changes with the environment, geography, and population of the South. So let's go ahead and start off with the environment. So yes, the Civil War did impact the Southern environment, as all the combat and destruction would have had detrimental effects on the battlegrounds. So up on the top you can see this image there. That is an example of how the Civil War battles could have affected the South, because a lot of deforestation would have occurred from all these battles. A lot of pollution would have occurred, definitely, from all the gunpowder in the air, from all the smoke, from all the fire. It could have had a lot of really negative consequences on the environment with these wars. So here's a quote I had from the University of South Florida, St. Petersburg, that says, "The burning and digging of the Civil War drastically transformed the landscape and overturned the basis of the Southern economy." So it definitely would have overturned the basis of the Southern economy, because as we know, the Southern economy during the Civil War times and before those times really thrived in agriculture. So with all this destruction, with all this carnage, and with all these elements going into the ground, such as gunpowder, metal from bullet casings, it would have made it a lot harder to grow crops in this agriculture. So the Civil War did have big effects on the environment, and you can still see it to this day, because sometimes crops are still hard to grow from where these battlefields occurred, and people don't even grow crops where these battlefields occurred sometimes. But a lot of the carnage really did affect the soil and made it hard to grow, which really affects the Southern economy. And also, trees burning and trees being lifted out of the ground also affects the soil, as the soil doesn't get enough oxygen within it. So that's how the environment, and you can still see this to this day in the South. So that's how the environment could have been affected. The geography is another one that could have been infected, as the combat of the Civil War had many impacts on the geography due to the destruction of the war and soldiers living on the lands. So the soldiers living on the lands, it's not all about how the wars and how the battles affected it, but there's a lot of times where it is how the people living there, how the soldiers living there affected it. So here's a quote I had from New Georgia Encyclopedia that says, "Ebenezer Creek on December 9th, where Jefferson C. Davis removed the pontoon bridge before enslaved people can cross, where men, women, and children plunged into the deep water and many drowned in an attempt to reach safety." So something that the Civil War could have affected was ways to traverse the geography of the land. More specifically, what I mean is, like, many bridges, as you can see here with Jefferson Davis, removed a bridge that affected the geography, because it became harder for soldiers, citizens, and anyone to move throughout the geography, which led to a lot of people's deaths in certain cases. And then also battles could destroy many things, such as bridges and things of that nature. And then a lot of the land would actually, interestingly enough, be terraformed during this time. And terraforming the land would be irreversible, as many people and soldiers terraformed the land to create trenches. And they would fight, sleep, and live in these trenches, basically. So here's a quote from the American Battlefield Trust: "Things like high mounds of earth to protect cannons, or spiky breastwork to slow down an enemy charge." That's what these trenches were described as. So the soldiers and citizens would affect the geography, and this can still be seen to this day, with many battlegrounds still having lots of the trenches remaining. Um, the land can never be changed back to its original form. So the terraforming of these lands does affect the geography over time with the Civil War and still to this day. And my last point is with population. So along with both the environment and geography changing due to the Civil War, the population was also impacted as well. A website I found for this called the American Battlefield Trust, the same one that I used the source from, goes into a number of deaths that the Confederacy had, as there was almost 600,000 men that served in the Confederacy, and almost 500,000 died in these battles, which that would take a huge toll on the population, as about 5/6 of the population that was of the South that were soldiers in the Confederacy died from this war. And then another thing is, whenever the war ended, as we all know, slavery ended as well. So the population was then affected by the freedmen, because here I have a quote here. Oppressive conditions in the South, African Americans began relocating to the West. Starting in the 1870s, at least 40,000 African Americans became exodusters, where they moved to Kansas and surrounding areas in search of better lives that was free from domestic terrorism. This is from National Archives and Records Administration. So many freedmen would also leave the South because there was just so much racism there. There was a lot of domestic terrorism, and there were better jobs. Not that just were not agriculture jobs. There were jobs in textiles and things of that nature. So while the environments and the geography were affected, the population was also greatly affected, as many people in the South died because of the Civil War, and many African Americans would move away to escape this prejudice. So in conclusion, the Civil War did not just affect the politics and people involved in it, it also affected the environment, geography, and population. The environment and geography would be disrupted by many battles as trees would be cut down, forests would be burned, and animal habitats would be destroyed by the war. Population would also, as many people were killed in the South from this war, and many would look to escape from racism and looking for new work. And in this image you can see up here on the top, that is what a Civil War battleground to this day was to look like. The environment is still forever changed by that, and it's impossible to change. And here are some of my citations. Well, thank you guys so much for listening to this presentation. I hope you have a great day. Thank you.